Hello, and welcome to the Santee Church of Christ Bible Study Review, where we just look over the last class that we had very briefly to encapsulate what the class was about. We are currently in the book of Deuteronomy, and we'll be covering chapter 32. We did a little bit actually the week before, but I wanted to leave it all in one review. Now, chapter 32 is a song that Moses was asked to write and sing for the people. In other words, it wasn't so much that he was to sing it as much as it was to be for the people to sing it so they could make it a part of their history, because it actually is going to be history. So the song itself is not like the last song that we see Moses sing previously when they left Egypt in the book of Exodus. That song was a book. That song is essentially a song of victory after God had defeated the Egyptian army in the Red Sea. That song glorified God. This song glorifies God as well because it makes him the focus. But it also makes Israel part of that focus as well. And there are issues with what happens there. This is a final warning for the people, essentially. So I'm just going to briefly go over what God says, and then we'll touch on some points really quick. Chapter 32, he says things like, it opens up very beautifully. It says, "My doctrine will drop as rain. My speech will drop as the dew, as a small rain on the tender plant." God is being very gentle in the beginning here. And he says, this is Moses speaking. He says, "I will proclaim the name of Jehovah and ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock." So here is the rock who is God, the only true and living God. His ways are just. And then he talks about a God of faithfulness without evil. He is upright. And then in verse 5, "They have corrupted themselves. They are not his sons. It is their blemish. Do you give back to Jehovah, you foolish people? Remember the ancient days." So he's basically saying in the future you're going to fall away, and these are the things you need to be able to remember. "When the Most High divided the nations of their inheritance," this is much later on, he's telling them, you need to remember this point in time when God divides the land for you. "For Jehovah's portion is his people. Jacob is his inheritance." You guys belong to God. He found him in a desert, and Jehovah led him. There was no strange God with him. He made him ride high on places, butter from cows and milk from the flock, fat from the lambs and rams, the sons of Bashan and he-goats. So he talks about the blessings to Jacob. But Jeshurun, that's another name for Israel. It just means straight. Jeshurun grew fat. This is in verse 15. And he grew thick and sated. And he abandoned God who made him and fell away from the rock of his salvation. Again, referring to God as the rock. "With strange gods they moved him to jealousy, and they provoked him to anger. You forgot the rock," verse 18. Verse 19, "Jehovah looked and despised them." Verse 20, "I will see that their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, sons in whom is no faithfulness," no trustworthiness. This is not speaking specifically of this generation more than it is the things that will happen later, especially under the kings, much, much later. "They made me jealous with a not a God, and I will make them jealous with a not a people." In other words, a strange nation will come in and defeat them. "I will heap evils on them," 23. "I will send them exhaustion by famine," 24. 26. "I will dash them to pieces. I will make their memories cease from men." And then it talks about briefly how the nations who conquer Israel will not understand that it's God doing this. They'll think it's themselves. They are a nation void of counseling, and no understanding is in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would consider their latter end. How could one chase 1,000 and two put a myriad to fight if it were not their rock that sold them it? In other words, God that sold Israel. And Jehovah shut them up. So there's going to be a point where the other nations do conquer Israel, but they don't understand that it's Jehovah God. They're going to think it's themselves. And then it says, their rock is not our rock. Even our enemies being judges, their wine is the vine of Sodom, their wine is the venom of serpents. Is it not stored up with me, sealed in my treasuries? Vengeance and retribution belong to me. In due time, their foot will slip. So at some point, the peoples that conquer Israel will slip up. Jehovah will bring his people justice in verse 26, and he will have compassion on his servants. He will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they sought refuge? So he's proving himself even to these foreigners that he is the only God. See, I am he, there is no other God like me. Rejoice, O nations of his people, for he shall avenge the blood of his servants, and shall render vengeance to his foes, and shall have mercy on his land and his people. So we see that happen many, many years later, after they've fallen away and after they've been conquered. God brings them back as a remnant. Moses came and spoke these things to the people, and all the words that I've testified against you today, set your heart on that, to do the words of the law, for it is not a useless word. It is your life. So he's giving these final statements before he ends. And then Jehovah comes and speaks to God, to Moses, and tells him, go up to this Mount Abiram, to Mount Nebo, in the land of Moab, which I am giving to the sons of Israel, and die in the mountain where you are going. So he tells Moses, you need to leave, and because you're going to die in the Mount Nebo, because you transgressed toward me among the sons of Israel at the waters. You did not sanctify me. The strife at Kadesh was an issue back in the book of Numbers. You shall see the land across from you, but you shall not go there. So this was something that Moses had to understand, that God was not happy with what he did in Numbers chapter 20. God told him to go speak to a rock to get water, and instead he seemingly angrily struck the rock and didn't obey God. And even so, he didn't give attribution to God when he did what he was doing. He didn't say, God is going to make the water come out of here. I think that he might have gotten off with a little less severity had he at least given God the glory. He says, do you want us to get this water for you? And he strikes the rock, and he doesn't give any attribution to God, which God basically says, because you didn't sanctify me before the people, you're not going to go in to see the land. So we see in that song the goodness and righteousness of God. God is their rock. The people forget God, and they abandon him. God's anger burns against them and brings calamity to them. And the enemy will gain their upper hand and then not understand why it is that they gain the upper hand. They don't become godly people because of it. And then when there are a few people left, God will bring them back. And when you read further into the scriptures, you find that's exactly what happens. It's not a useless law. Moses is telling them, this is not useless. It is your life. That is probably one of the key verses in that chapter. It was a matter of the heart, as was my thinking. It was to reveal the character of Jehovah, and thus the character that they were supposed to carry. It was their lifeblood. They can't live without it. That's basically the same way the Christian views the Christ. We don't want to live without the Christ. We want to be like him. We want to emulate him. We want to understand him better. We want him to know us. And that's where God was leading Israel at this time. So the question was also, why won't Moses enter? I just went over that. He just did not sanctify God before the people when he needed to. And nothing's changed. It's the same thing today as it's ever been. God always deserves the glory that we can send his way. We don't do anything on our own. The Christian doesn't think, I deserve God's grace or God owes me grace. We all understand that God gives us grace simply because he's a gracious God. By his very nature, he is a loving, kind Father. And that was what God was trying to get the Israelites to understand even in that day. Nothing's changed. Everything has really remained a lot the same. So that brings us very close to the end of this book. We're going to have one more class where the last two chapters are very, very, very poetic and very beautiful. Chapter 33 goes over the blessings. The book is essentially going to end on a good note towards Israel. The blessings of having a God like Jehovah. And then in chapter 34, Moses dies. And we see a very intimate moment between God and Moses in that chapter, and we'll get into that next week. Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in the Church of Christ, or if you want to know what God has planned for you in your life, if you question what this is all about, a lot of people make Christianity very difficult. But Jesus didn't come and die on the cross to make it difficult. He very much made it simple to understand and simple to see how it is to bear fruit for God. If you have any questions, you can contact us at any one of our online pages, YouTube, Facebook, or santeechurchofchrist.org. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you.